Hello my dear friends, how is it going? I hope I find you all in good health and safe and sound. I'm Arith, and today I'm going to talk about shamans and shamanism in animism. This is the last video of this year in this channel, and I really wanted to end it all by addressing this subject. I'm not sure what the future holds and what will happen next year in relation to this channel, but at least I was able to give an extra effort and reach this far. Now, to begin with, I said this before, but it won't do any harm saying it again. Throughout this video, I'll be using the term shaman and shamanism for a better understanding and to pass on the message or deliver the information without having to constantly pause to explain the nomenclature. But indeed, I am well aware concerning the etymology derived from the Tungusic language, mainly from eastern Siberia, and indeed eventually I shall speak of Siberian forms of shamanism. So I'll be using the term shaman as the general term to address spiritual leaders, or better still, performers of spiritual roles of animistic communities. But when speaking of particular performers of a specific culture and not as a whole, we should indeed use the correct terms in their own languages. In addition, I would like to say that at the end of this video, I'll present to you the bibliography, the sources I've used to help me compose this video. However, I know that there is a well-known book many people use in their studies of shamanism. I myself have used it, which is this one right here, Shamanic Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy by Mercy Eliade. This book won't be in the bibliography. Everything that shall be said in this video isn't drawn from this book unless when I directly speak of it, because indeed I am showing you this book on purpose because I have to address it when it comes to certain ideas concerning shamanism, which have become sort of common knowledge, but it isn't as simple as that. I have used this book in the past. I have enjoyed it. However, comparing this work with more recent studies on shamanism and speaking with actual indigenous peoples, interviews, anthropological works and reports, etc., I no longer find this book to be of great significance to the point of using it as a main source. Surely, it has very interesting ideas, and I'm not saying it should be totally discarded. I just think it must be read with a grain of salt, as it were. I'm not even talking about the misogynist, xenophobic and racist views of the author that have greatly distorted the reality of shamanism, because those are in plain sight. I am talking about the manipulation of information to suit the views of the author, which do not correspond to the truth, because shamanism in itself isn't a religion, but it is a response to an animistic worldview. Particular roles performed by people in order to better serve their communities. And the author has purposely dismissed the diversity of beliefs which are plainly evident in the very materials he manipulated. So by all means, read it, it's useful in some ways, but take in mind what I've just said. When it comes to the study of animism, and by extent shamanism, I have come to this moment in life that I no longer see such sources as appropriate and indeed not at all reliable in several points, which is why I'm not including this book in the bibliography. I haven't used it, not this time. I don't agree it should be a primary source, but indeed used as a form of criticism by comparing it with more recent studies. But it must be addressed eventually throughout this video, as it is an outdated source that has built the foundations of what we think we know about shamanism, especially creating distorted views that have helped to create the very foundations of New Age movements of shamanism, which totally miss the point. Not to mention the fact that animism and animistic worldviews have been dismissed when dealing with shamanism. And that is a grave mistake because, as I said many times before, there's no shamanism without animism, and it's crucial to understand the animistic mentality in order to understand the pragmatic behaviors of human societies towards an animistic lifestyle and world perception. As such, we can better understand shamanism, which is, after all, a pragmatic behavior that only exists in animism because it is precisely a response to an animistic consciousness in an attempt to create relationships between persons and to serve communities of peoples by engaging in relationships with the inhabitants of the world, which are not just humans. But we shall get to it. Now, with no more delay, let's start our today's video. My dear friends, please. So, let us start by addressing the role of the shaman. Not everything the shaman does has to be considered shamanism, and I'm specifically saying this because of the ongoing idea that every action taken and every decision making in the life of a shaman needs to have a meaning or a purpose. We must not forget that shamans are people with their own lives, in need of sustenance. They eat, they communicate, they live. Not every action of a shaman is shamanism. Shamanism in itself is a performance for the community, a series of actions that do not take place on a daily basis, but rather when it is necessary. A performance to serve the community, unlike nowadays virtual or online shamans by the thousands who place themselves as the central figure and everything else is channeled towards them or revolves around them for a monetary price, of course. The role of the shaman is essentially communal, an employment of performance for others. I understand that there's usually the idea that a shaman is a spiritual leader, and I myself have used that term before to avoid the use of the term shaman. But the idea of a spiritual leader can be quite misleading and cause several misunderstandings that force to step away from the understanding of the role of a shaman. Because there's no shaman or shamanism if there isn't community, if there isn't a group towards whom a shamanic performance is aimed at. The shaman doesn't exist on its own. Not every person within a community is a shaman, but a community may have a shaman. But that shaman can only exist because of the needs of the community. So the shaman is a performer of actions for the community. Shamanism is a service, if you take my meaning. Let's put it this way. It's like a water well, which was constructed for the function of serving the needs of a community as a source of water. But if there is no community, the water well has no function, because it won't serve that which it was built for, and there's no one to manage it. From the moment there is a community, the water well will serve its purpose. So, taking this into consideration, perhaps we can better understand the fact that just because a shaman exists in a community and performs acts of shamanism for the community, that doesn't mean that both the shaman and the community itself are followers of a religion called shamanism, nor is it shamanism the basis of a religion. The shaman is a performer of very specific services towards the community within a culture. Shamans have been compared to priests, as you know it, or understood to be some sort of priests of an indigenous community. But the only real similarity is in the sense of providing communal service, a performance in which the community also participates, as it is a service for the community and its members participate in it. But the shaman, unlike a priest, isn't bound to a religious creed, and its function isn't to provide religious knowledge. Since this channel is mostly about Scandinavian studies, we can take the example of the Volva, the prophetess or soothsayer or seeress in the source Eric's saga, Roda. The services of the soothsayer are required by the community, and she performs a Seder rite. But in order to do so, she requires a song to be sang by the women of the community. To be more precise, the community faces an epidemic and, obviously, uncertainty concerning the future assails the community. A prominent farmer in the region invites an itinerant seer to his home to perform a divinatory ritual. The practitioner, the performer, is a woman named Torbjörg, to whom a meal is given and she spends the night at the farm before the day of the performance. The day after, at Torbjörg's bidding, the women of the farm must gather in a circle around the seer's platform and sing a special incantation in order for the seer to do her performance and her Seder divinatory act. I'm not going into great details as I have explored this before on the video concerning Vartlokur, so if you have the time, please watch the video for more information on this matter. The point here is that the seer, Torbjörg, is invited by the community to perform her services. She is involved in the community, and the community itself is involved in the very performance. This is the same thing concerning a shaman, a performer of certain actions for the community, in which the shaman is involved and the community itself is involved in the very actions, performance, rite, service, or ceremony. Torbjörg, just like a shaman, does not take part in the daily affairs of a community and isn't there to administer any services of a religious character, but it is instead a performer of specific services. In the case of Torbjörg, it is a divinatory rite of Seder, takes part in the community for as long as the ceremony endures, and the service is provided, and involves the community in the process. The performance itself brings together both the shaman and the community, and a service is performed. Whatever religious beliefs a community may have, shamanism isn't specifically a response towards those religious beliefs, but may be influenced by such beliefs. Shamanism is instead the response of an animistic worldview, a worldview that constructs systems of belief that form certain religious elements that can vary from community to community. Shamanism exists under animism because shamanism is a performance of services towards animistic perceptions of the world. In other words, shamans live and work for animists and not for shamanists. Just because a shaman performs within a community doesn't make the community a group of shamans, or they themselves being shamans of a shamanic religion and shamanists being the members of that religion. No, the shaman performs for animists, who are people that live within an animistic worldview. The religions of these communities are animisms, not shamanisms. That is, animistic systems of belief that form the basis of the religions of animistic societies. I hope I've made myself clear, but no worries, we shall explore this together further ahead. In this way, shamans exist and are necessary because of animism, because their performances are required as a response towards animistic beliefs, a performance whose primary function is to serve the community by the interaction with the persons believed to exist in the world under the animistic worldview. And so shamans are performers sometimes necessary to build, maintain, and renew certain relationships between persons for the benefit of communities. I'm not just talking about performances for human communities, but indeed a greater involvement with all persons, be those animal persons, human persons, other than human persons, more than human persons. And the services of the shamans are towards the building of relationships between different persons of the world. And from such relationships, there's an ongoing symbiotic correspondence that brings about beneficial aspects that help persons thrive in life. In other words, shamans perform in accordance to the world as it is understood and lived by animists. This is why it is crucial to understand animism in order to understand shamanism. And this is also why these days there are hundreds of thousands of online shamans, workshop shamans, please pay me to scam you shamans. and why there's no real shamanic performances coming from such people, because they are not performing towards communities that understand and experience the world as animists and with an animistic worldview, which is problematic, as a shaman by itself is a performer in response to the life and experience of an animistic world, and not a performer towards a non-animistic life and experience. I believe this is one of the reasons why in mythologies the trickster spirit resembles the shaman, as it's always the trickster spirit that tests the boundaries, that helps to establish new realities, new life forms, and new relationships. If by any chance you remember what I've said on the video about trickster spirits in animism, you will remember that in mythologies the figure of the trickster spirit isn't particularly understood to be a deity, but rather an entity that tests the realities fabricated by creator deities. Creator gods in mythologies are responsible for creating particular realities that suits their wishes and according to the plans they have designed. However, the mythological entity representative of the trickster spirit often tests the boundaries created by the gods, leading to the possibility of the creation of more realities by the alteration of the original reality, even forcing new life forms to exist precisely by creating realities that were not originally planned by creator gods. We see this in Old Norse mythology in the figure of Loki, who is always present as an element of change, a trickster spirit. Loki being an entity of movement who is always the one who makes the stories continue, and everyone involved is ultimately changed by Loki's actions. Loki constantly tests the boundaries determined by the gods, forces changes. The original plans of the gods are flawed. So evolution is never static because Loki, the trickster spirit, constantly challenges and tests the original plans of creation. It's an element of transgression, which is why in mythologies trickster spirits often also reflect the roles and functions of shamans, as shamans are elements of transgression in a way, and constantly test the boundaries of nature and life, precisely as attempts to find appropriate ways to live alongside other entities that inhabit the world, which are not just human. The building of relationships between humans and non-human entities that is only possible through the powerful tests of the shaman, who works as a mediator between peoples that inhabit the world under the animistic perspective. So it's really curious to see how trickster spirits and shamans are portrayed in mythology and folklore as a kind of cultural heroes, and the similarities between the roles of supernatural tricksters and shamans who provide humanity with benefits, and at times even appearing as creator entities of their own. The ability of shape-shifting of both trickster spirits and shamans, and their fluidity of gender identification, shifting according to the necessity or the necessary action and the role to be played. Trickster spirits are semi-divine shamans, and shamans are semi-divine heroes, both halfway between deity and cultural hero, being the most popular characters of world mythologies and folktales. In this way, shamans are mediators and elements through which symbiotic relationships can be built and maintained for the benefit of communities of persons, attempting to relate respectfully with other communities of persons, be those animal persons, deities, trickster spirits, ancestors, spirits of nature, etc. There must be this element in animistic societies that helps in the interaction between persons of different species and different realities and even different forms of existence, in order to create safe spaces and live respectfully within an environment. And this element is the shaman. So the shaman, just like its representation in mythology, the trickster spirit, not only is the element that tests boundaries in order to create realities of relationship that were not originally planned, but also has the function of maintaining and renew such relationships that are crucial for the well-being of the human community within the wider community of life, in which other communities of non-human persons exist and are capable of interaction with humans through the efforts of shamans that have established these possibilities of interactions. I confess that this is one of the main reasons why I'm never happy about the massive amount of people that shout that they are shamans and they do this and they do that. And it's a whole online world of keyboard shamans, because in my view, that sort of behavior is highly disrespectful towards real shamans and gives them a bad image, due to the fact that the role of actual shamans requires outstanding efforts to establish relationships and mediate between persons. Let's create a mind image here, shall we? As if it were the construction of a delicate fabric made of silk, and various populations of persons in the world keep pulling it, because that's the way things are when we all try to coexist in the same environments, and there are constant clashes, accidents. It's part of life, even unwillingly causing damage, illness, and even death through the experience of living life and trying to live. And the fragile silk fabric, which is constantly being constructed, it's also being constantly torn apart, tearing, and shamans doing the effort to keep it all together and mending the damage precisely by trying to establish and reinforce the relationships, renew them when there's a break of taboo, trying to safeguard and stabilize and strengthen relationships which are under constant threat by everyday actions and every people and natural laws of life. Communities of persons, be those human or animal or other, will constantly test the boundaries of creation, precisely by all of these populations of persons trying to live alongside each other, trying to coexist and seek sustenance in order to live. So there are certain acts of violence that cause real harm and damage to the environment, and collateral damage that affects several communities of persons. And in an animistic society, there's the need for the existence of shamans whose role is to establish and maintain relationships that are constantly compromised. Shamans are involved in the engagement with different peoples that exist in the world, perhaps more intensely and far more direct, dealing even with unwelcomed persons, dangerous persons, natural predators, sickness or sicknesses, forces of nature that threaten symbiotic relationships that have been established for the benefit of the community of persons involved in those relationships. So, we have already understood that shamans play particular roles in a human society, and one of their main functions is to create relationships, often with non-human entities. So, one of the first things that comes to mind when speaking of shamans and, by extent, shamanism, is their ability to travel to places and realities to meet with non-human and non-animal entities. In many cultures, shamans are thought to travel to places beyond the physical space where their bodies might be located. In other words, trance states, astral projections, soul journeys, call it what you will. As a whole, out-of-body experiences. This seems to be a reality inherent in the figure and role of the shaman in practically almost every animistic society and culture. But I should like to address something as a form of criticism because of the common misconceptions that have been established and what we think we know concerning the realms to which a shaman can travel in spirit. I think anyone who has ever read anything about shamanism certainly came about at least once how the cosmologies of shamanism are constructed. This also appears in several academic works, scientific works concerning shamanism, which is the perception that the cosmos consists of three levels in shamanic cosmologies, which are the upper, middle, and lower world. The basic idea is that the middle world is humanity's home, and so the shaman sometimes either descends into the lower world or ascends to the upper world when necessity calls for it. Now, this is a very recurrent idea, one that I also believe to be perfectly reasonable, as it is consistent in many works concerning shamanism, be those esoteric, personal descriptions, academic works, scientific works, and so on and so forth. But this idea isn't entirely true, and there's no reason to be ashamed for having believed in this perception as it has been portrayed so many times. We just took it for granted and it falls into common knowledge. However, it's scary how an idea is created, it spreads so much to the point of becoming common knowledge, and it becomes the truth, completely indisputable. And anyone saying otherwise, even demonstrating through concrete sources, many people would not accept it because, well, why should they? It has been like this for so long. Even if an actual shaman would come forth and say, hey, what you think you know about shamanism isn't at all true, I'm sure many people would completely discard what the actual shaman had to demonstrate. So that's scary as societies go, and the fervent need to hold on to illusionary conceptions of what we desire to be the truth. So yes, I'm making a criticism on Eliad's work and construction of what he wanted to be shamanism. The idea of 3 levels of the cosmos in shamanism is a construction central to Eliad's life's work, among other conceptions, of course. But it is an imposition by the author. And we know this for 2 main reasons. To begin with, shamanism isn't a religion with its own structure of cosmologies. In addition, shamanism is a performance within and towards animistic belief systems. Therefore, the conceptions of the cosmos cannot be labeled as shamanic cosmologies, because it simply doesn't exist. What exists are conceptions of cosmologies within animism. So the perception of the cosmos for shamans follow the perceptions of the cosmos for the animistic societies in which they are inserted. Also, there's a wondrous variety of conceptions of cosmologies in animistic societies, which means for the shaman, the diversity of the realities of cosmologies in which the shaman is involved cannot simply be resumed to 3 levels, as 3 levels or 3 worlds are not the entirety of the structures of cosmologies within animism. Furthermore, the sources Eliad used to compose this work show precisely what I've just said. There's an outstanding variety and diversity of the structures of cosmologies shamans deal with and experience, as evident by the materials the author has manipulated to express his construction of an alleged archaic cosmology. Eliad's scheme of 3 levels matches those of the Evenks, Tungusic people of North Asia. Indeed, but that's just one example that cannot serve as proof of a standardized model of Siberian traditions concerning animistic cosmologies, let alone the multiple shamanic traditions of other places and cultures and how their cosmologies are understood and structured. Looking at different Siberian ethnographies, we come about a rich diversity of cosmologies, and this is for Siberia alone. A rich diversity of cosmologies, each with different realms or worlds with their own geographies, entities, fauna and flora, and the different processes of the shamans to mediate with the different inhabitants, and the diversity of attitudes according to each different place within a space, as is also reflected on animistic cosmologies of pre-Christian Scandinavia. As an example, usually thought to be 9 worlds or realms, but these 9 realms are never really evident, as this conception of 9 is a standardized model in later sources, in later periods, that follows myths of creation, early myths of creation involving 9 cosmic mothers. In several different sources dealing with Old Norse perceptions of a cosmology, we see places within places and spaces within spaces, and the number of realms isn't that well defined, and there's a multiplicity of existence. Old Norse afterlife realms alone that have survived in the sources are close to 50. And this is just realms for the human dead, not counting with other realities that are inhabited by other entities that are not exclusively the human dead. And we are speaking of a perception of Scandinavian cosmology for the Iron Age alone, a tiny fragment of a period of human history within particular cultural patterns. In many cultures, if not all animistic cultures, shamans in their roles as performers are thought to travel momentarily to places, realities, or realms other than where the body is located. And it's true, many of such places can be found above this world, others below it, but this doesn't constitute a perception of three levels, as many of such places are to be found within this world, with no particular concrete distance, time, space, and position. Even in animistic cosmologies that may present an idea of upper and lower spaces, there's frequently a lot more layers even in the middle world. For instance, many animistic cosmologies don't even deal with upper, middle, and lower perceptions, as the shaman seeks out, for instance, a missing person or object for someone who is asking for the aid of the shaman, or the shaman seeks to reason and bargain with a spirit to send forth an animal to be sacrificed to feed the human community, or to mediate with a shaman of another community, a shaman that doesn't have to be specifically a human or even a living person. The idea here is that in many animistic societies, the perception of a cosmology in terms of the space the shaman experiences is rarely on upper or lower levels, but instead it all happens within the world. This doesn't mean that there aren't perceptions of realities out of this world per se. Within animism, there is, or there are. Although it's not an idea of up, middle, and down, but rather spaces of existence that aren't always understood to be constructed in layers, but rather intercepting and even coexisting on the same space, but only on different experimental spaces of perception. Intertwined. Since we are talking about shamans and shamanism, and the roots of the term lie in Eastern Siberian Tungusic language, we can take the example of the perception of cosmologies for the Siberian shamans. Even though there's a perception of an upper world, sometimes it's always subdivided by different realms or worlds, if you will. The same thing as divisions and subdivisions of the middle and the lower world. And the perceptions of the visions of these realities doesn't always depend on the experiences of the shaman, but also on the daily activities of the members of the community and the specific activities attributed to some people, like a hunter, whose perceptions of hunting grounds are realities of existence that fit into their daily reality, and the shaman will focus on such perceptions of realities to fit into the needs of the hunter. And we also must take into consideration religious syncretism and how it shapes the animistic perceptions and subsequently the belief systems and religions under the animistic worldview of societies that exchange different cultural patterns. While a Siberian shaman further north may only have to deal with 2 or 3 worlds, one further south will have to deal with 6 or 9 worlds, very much depending on the animistic beliefs of the cultures in which the shaman is inserted. This is why it is important to understand animism. It is crucial. It's not the shaman that creates shamanism. It is the animistic belief systems of the culture in which the shaman is inserted that will shape the shaman. And the shaman will conduct its performance towards the beliefs of the community the shaman performs to. The problem here with Eliade and all other authors was trying to create a shamanic cosmology as if shamanism was a religion to try to fit into Western religious patterns of an eternal space for human souls that somehow the shaman has access to. But that sort of perception doesn't fit into animism, because the conceptions and notions of realities depend very much on the animistic belief systems of a culture. As another example, if we solely focus on Amazonian animism, we come to understand that the multiplicity of realities beyond death alone are just too diverse, not to mention the multiplicity of existence of an entity, a single entity, according to activities, social status, and personal choices. Among the Yagua, for instance, an example, the cosmos not only is vertically displayed in layers above the earth, but also subdivided horizontally into various other worlds, realms, homes, or areas, not to mention the homes and areas within and without the human settlements. So there could never be a single reality or a reality of three levels or even several layers of the same levels for animistic cosmologies, because such cosmologies are too diverse to fit into basic constructions. It's an infinite number of possibilities under animistic belief systems, which means these possibilities will influence the shaman in its perception of realities. Again, there's no such thing as shamanic cosmologies. At the very least, what can be said to avoid misinterpretations is that there are animistic cosmologies, which are a spiral of multiple diversities, and the shaman of a culture will only get to experience a tiny fraction of cosmological diversities according to the belief systems of the animistic society where the shaman is inserted. I thought this would be important to say, to have a better notion of the role of the shaman in animistic societies and the vast diversity of engagements. Speaking of animistic cosmologies and what the shaman experiences and this multiplicity of existences and diversity of cosmological geographies, of course it often comes the question if all of this is real, or what is real and what isn't, or perhaps a more skeptical approach, which is perfectly natural, that all of this is false. When it comes to shamans and therefore shamanism, shamanism in the sense of a performance within animistic societies, I don't think the question is if it is true or to what extent the truth can run until it passes the boundary into falsehood. I think the question here is what creates the perception of the false. Because if we think about it, in terms of these experiences, the false is only perceptible by those who cannot or will not see or experience certain aspects of life and of the human psyche. In this sense, things are only false or true according to what we can or are able to experience. Taking the performances of shamans as an engagement with persons of the world, the truth or falsehood very much depends on the engagement people have with others within their own cultures and perceptions of reality fabricated by those cultures. I'm not going to debate on that, but I think we can agree that there's always more of the unseen than what can actually be seen. As humanity progresses, we continuously find out about the existence of objects and life forms that are generally unseen and go beyond the social spaces each individual creates. So stepping over the boundary of what we have constructed for our personal reality, we always find a lot of information that never before we would have dreamt about. And we realize that the perception of reality of others is much different than ours. Thus, by this engagement with others, we expand our perception of what we choose to be real and false. So the shaman, as an individual that extends engagement beyond the human settlement and beyond the human social interactions, will discover new patterns that will extend its own perception of what is true and false, if you take my meaning. This is very much the primary role of the shaman, an engagement with persons, not all of whom are human or just animal. As Graham Harvey puts it, one of my sources, you shall see at the bibliography, the shaman engages with persons with whom the rest of the human community would rather have no close contact with or are unable to perceive. Just because you can't see it or experience it doesn't mean it is false. The perception of falsehood belongs to those who cannot or will not see it. In terms of this subject we are dealing with in this video, of course, obviously, that's not a rule applicable to everything in life, because there are several things science can explain, and some people will simply refuse to see it and accept the evidences and refuse to change their own minds, even with irrefutable evidences, because some people simply refuse to evolve, and that's a sign of cognitive inconsistency. But remember, just because you can't see it doesn't mean that you are likewise unseen. Anyway, I think it's important to remember that the role of the shaman is engagement with persons. Not all are human and not all of the non-human persons are animals. It's important to take this in mind to understand the social engagement with humans and the intersocialization to construct relationships for the benefit of the community or communities the shaman performs for and engages with. One of the key roles of shamans, if not indeed the primary role, is to be mediators. Within societies and according to each culture and how mentalities are shaped by culture, there are infinite possibilities in the creation of relationships, not solely within human communities and relationships between human persons, but the interactions humans have with other persons of the world, be those human, animal, or other than animal or other than human persons. There's always a multitude of possibilities. Interactions cause different outcomes, some of which are disastrous and can start a chain of events that affect generations of persons. From the moment any living creature lives, it will take action to survive and continue on living. And such actions have very real reactions upon real persons and real communities of peoples within the environment we all share, and real consequences as well. An example, hunting animals to eat and survive. From the moment there's the killing of an animal, within an animistic consciousness, this is the killing of a person, and it becomes a problem due to the belief in the existence of souls which are believed to not perish when the body dies. Therefore, a series of actions must be taken from the part of the shaman, because such souls must be propitiated to avoid the soul being angry and take revenge for having been taken away from its body. Culturally appropriate forms of respect are offered and respectful acts are promised at the moment of death and to be carried out after death. Forms of recompense are established with the souls of those who have been killed and towards those who care for the persons that have been killed. It is the shaman's job to establish conversations with those souls and with the persons of the community of the persons that have been killed, whose bodies serve as food resource for the sustenance of humans. The killing of persons, even out of necessity, constitutes an insult upon the life that was taken. This requires the shaman to mediate, apologize, and even to give a recompense. The taking of a life constitutes several difficulties, and it's very problematic, and many animistic societies try to find a solution by resorting to shamans. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The fact that some communities of human persons have no other choice but to hunt in order to survive isn't always acceptable by the persons that have been killed in order to ensure human survival. What seems to be a plausible cause for killing from the part of human persons, it isn't understood as such from the part of the person who was killed and its own community. The hunted and killed person and its community, family, and kin were insulted and assaulted. The shaman's role is to mediate and persuade the victim and its kin to not unleash acts of revenge upon hunters or fishers or anyone who kills in order to have sustenance. Sometimes it takes decent and respectful treatment of the body while it is being prepared for consumption or being transformed into food and into utensils and clothing. Sometimes it requires more than that, much more than that. It is the role of the shaman to mediate between parties, to reason with, converse, persuade, construct relationships in order to find suitable actions to avoid repercussions and unwelcomed consequences, by maintaining the animistic moral principles of living a respectful and ethical life. So, the primary role of shamans and their performance is towards mediation. Mediate according to the diversity of differences and possibilities that occur with the interactions of peoples. There is a multiplicity of occurrences, and mistakes or breaking of taboo sometimes happens, and it is the role of the shaman to mediate, even to build relationships or maintain or mend existing relationships that can be broken by disrespect or by an action that causes insult and disrespect. Relationships aren't always fixed and strong, and sometimes what maintains relationships are very strict daily actions of respect or prohibitions. The role of the shaman is to mitigate as much harm, damage, illness, and death as much as possible. Inadequate actions can lead to very serious problematic events, and the very foundations of animistic communities and even perceptions of the cosmos depends on respectful interactions with persons and between persons. And the shaman has this primary role to maintain certain ongoing relationships for the well-being of all life and the very fabric of existence, as a rupture in relationships can cause unwelcomed events that unfold terrible consequences for several peoples, which can lead to death and illness and fates worse than death, such as starvation, or certain illnesses, epidemics that affect and spread due to the inadequate interaction with other persons, both human and other than human. It's the role of the shaman to find ways to mitigate harm and damage, and such ways passed on to the human community within the cultural patterns of that community. That's when the shaman has a major influence on culture by transgressing the boundaries of established cultures in order to create new sceneries and possibilities that will give way to new life and more life to thrive, such like the trickster spirit, who tests and transgresses the boundaries of previously established social plans and structures, creating new possibilities for life and relationships, altering culture and tradition to better adapt to the required actions to build adequate relationships to avoid unwelcomed outcomes. Well then, I take the opportunity to wish you all a happy new year, and hopefully next year will bring us loads of new possibilities and wonderful surprises. I wish you all strength of mind and spirit, and may you find a sense of purpose and eagerness to live. Now, in relation to myself and this channel, I really don't know how next year is going to be. I don't know how far I can carry on doing videos, as I'm currently holding 3 jobs, and YouTube is really an extra job during my free time, which has become severely shortened. All I can tell you with certainty is that I'll try my best to carry on with this, as I know many of you appreciate what I do, and some people find comfort in my videos, so I do take that into consideration, believe me. In fact, that's the very thing that pushes me to have that extra effort to carry on doing videos, because I know what I create is very important to some people. Whatever next year may bring to this channel and to my life, it has been an honor to be at your service, and the friendship here created shall never be forgotten. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, thanks for today. Obrigado por hoje. Farewell.